Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David,
Hello, I'm Matt.
and we are the Taylor Bros.
Indeed, we are.
And we are really enjoying doing the Make It Count podcast. Today, Matt, what are we talking about?
We're talking about a topic we've spoken about before, control or self-control, but today we're contrasting it with controlling others and self-control.
So, what made you want to talk about this?
Well, when we, I think it's an interesting way to look at this topic because we often, I think when you talk about self-control, it's easy to think, oh yeah, like I need self-control in various aspects. So I need to be maybe disciplined or to make things, goals that I have, make the progress towards what I want, whether it's fitness or job or whatever, But when we were speaking about control in our last episode, I just had this idea of it'd be interesting to think about like how maybe sometimes instead of doing the hard work of practicing self-control and learning what that does, we instead default to actually behaviors which seek to control others or control the environment around us so that we don't have to have self-control, so that we can still get what we want, but actually it's through controlling others and the environment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not definitely an expert on maybe much of the stuff, but I was doing some reading around this about, controlling people and stuff like that, which is just quite interesting. These are controlling people when they do this and do that and do, it was like criticizing people and blaming them and being manipulative and all of these things. And I thought, well, probably everyone I know, including myself, have done these behaviors at some point. So
Absolutely.
we've all tried to control other people, probably.
100%. And you sent me a podcast to listen to the other day, and it's not like where we're going to be like, oh, that podcast, and isn't that the most amazing thing? But Henry Cloud, who's written loads of books, and is I think he's a psychologist by
I think he's a practicing psychiatrist. He's got a
psychiatrist.
PhD, a
I always
doctorate,
get these. Yeah. So he's done a lot of clinical work with people, and then he's written a lot of books, and so he knows what he's talking about. And they at one point in their conversation were talking about, when in relationships people always come to him and be like, oh well, I've discovered that my partner or this family member is they've got narcissistic tendency or whatever it is, that I don't know the full name, and therefore there's basically no hope for them. And he's like, total mumbo jumbo. Everybody at some point has acted narcissistically, and he's worked with people who have changed, and there is that hope. So kind of I think that just that recognition of all of us have expressed these, or another way to put it, we all play these games. I think it comes naturally. We learn them from a young age as how to play certain games to get what we want. And a book I'm going to refer to a little bit later again, so I just love it, John Powell's book, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? He actually has, like, in a sense, an appendix full of just, these are all the different kinds of games that people can play. And it's not an exhausted list, but it's a long list of, the loner, the pouter, the mummy, the all these different things of, this is how we show up in these contexts in order to get this out of us. And ultimately he's saying it's actually an attempt to hide our true self so that we won't be rejected because we're afraid of that. But I think maybe on a more surface level, we play, and we may be unaware that we're playing these games, but we play them to try and control people's response to us so that we are in safe ground and we can get to the end what we want without actually necessarily having to tread on anything really risky.
Yeah. And he sort of, Dr. Henry Cloud used that example, didn't he? So many people say, well, I'm not controlling. And they said, well, have you ever tried to like people please? He said, well, why are you doing that? Ultimately, you're doing that so that they like you. You're trying to control that situation so that you get what you want, which is that they like you. Well, that's an element of trying to control somebody else. And by people pleasing, and like you said, you're kind of like hiding what you want, maybe even from yourself, to actually so that other people will like who you're showing to be, or you're letting them have what they want. And
Yeah.
I suppose in some of my reading around it, it was just this idea that a desire for control is quite a deep-rooted thing and actually not wholly unhealthy. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the things is about having some sense of control. It was an interesting idea that there's a difference between actually having control or just having the sense of control. And how sometimes we do jobs where actually we're not in control. Our teacher or our manager or whoever, they're in control, but we have some sense of control, or we've trusted that to them. Um, but there's an unhealthy element of that, which, supposedly is rooted in like anxiety, in uncertainty, where when things are maybe or have happened are traumatic, we try and control everything around us, our environment and all things, because hey, we don't want that uncertainty, we don't want that anxiety, we don't want those things to go wrong. So we're going to try and control everything to prevent it. And so it's not necessarily, it's basically a normal coping response, I would suggest, for many of us, but there are varying degrees. It's not I'm a controlling person versus I'm not a controlling person. It's like, oh, there's a range of like how we deal with ourselves and how we deal with other people.
Yes, I really like that. And I like that you honed in, and this is something that, again, Dr. Henry Cloud was talking about, that control isn't actually in and of itself a bad thing.
Mm.
And he speaks from the faith perspective, which is, ultimately there is an element of design. We are made for control, to control. There, from a biblical point of view, you go at the beginning, there's this honored position to rule and to reign, and then in the image of God, who ultimately, you would go, he is the one who controls everything. But I'm just reminded, and you think about this, it's so interesting that, again, that creation narrative and what happens, the choice given to these humans, either to live by this tree of life, which is a bit mysterious, or, warned against choosing to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And of course, what's the common phrase, or that really just really well-known phrase? Knowledge is power, right? And I think there's an element of, I want to control my environment, I want to control the world, and I'll do that through knowledge, and therefore that's what I'm going to seize and take, rather than from the very beginning was this invitation to live by trust and to live by that life and that faith. And I think we're going to weave this in, and I'm sure that in the future we're going to do some more episodes on trust. But trust plays a huge part in this, how we choose to show up, whether choose to exercise self-control or to try and control others. Because again, part of what this is if I don't trust you to handle me well when I reveal my true self, I will seek to manipulate you to respond in a certain way, and I will only show you the part of myself that I think you will handle well. So effectively, I put on a mask to hide my true self, my true desires, because I think you won't be able to handle it. Whereas if you have shown yourself trustworthy and I've opened myself to you, then I'm learning to trust you, and I don't have to control you. I can just go, here is what I'm feeling right now, or here is me, and trust you to respond in a way that is, and so again, that's partly, so a lot of the reading around this goes, ultimately people that try to control others are really, it's a really big red flag that goes, what they actually need is they need nurture, and they need someone to allay their fear of abandonment. I thought that's really fascinating. The people that you would go, they are so domineering, or so, what we all think is, well, they need to be shown, they need to be knocked down a peg. Actually, that's the complete opposite of what they truly need. Underneath that, they need nurturing, they need care, and they need to see, oh, when I'm seen, they don't walk away.
Yeah, and there's a lot there that's quite interesting. I was in a conversation with somebody recently, and just talking about the manager of them, their manager, and just going, oh, like the manager you have works from this place of like knowledge is power. So they withhold knowledge, they withhold information. So nobody thinks that they can do that job that they're doing. Probably if they led more open-handedly, they would. But actually, by withholding the information, they keep control, they keep power because they're going, oh, like nobody else has this information. This information is mine. Now I'm in charge. I can control what's going on. And just going, that's not the only way to lead, but that's interesting. And I suppose one of the things that you talked about there was just this idea that do we trust ourselves or entrust ourselves to other people, and how I think it was a parenting advice by Andy Stanley and his wife, and they were saying one of the things they were told and what they've lived out is never overreact
Yeah.
positively or never negatively to your children. They said there's so many children that hate the fact that their parents overreact even positively, like, oh, that's amazing, getting all hyper and everything. And that's as bad as overreacting negatively. But also, that really emotive reaction is often quite a negative experience, especially for an uncertain or maybe insecure teenager. But actually, how true is that also for us as adults? Like, we don't want to be having a conversation with somebody where if we say the wrong thing, it's an explosion,
Yeah.
that, and it's like, oh, and those people who are unable to maybe self-regulate or self-control, other people then, like you said, maybe we don't respond in a nurturing way. We self manage ourselves and disclose less, and we try and control the environment so that they don't explode, and everyone says we are treading on eggshells. That's the phrase for somebody that can't self-manage or self-control. And so it was interesting as well, because one of the things that I read that was like quite a controlling behavior was this idea of blaming. And I said, well, how is blaming related to control? Like, that didn't make sense in my head. Like,
Mm.
if they're blaming something else, they're not in control. And that was the point, that in blaming other people, they don't have to take control. They don't have to take
Yeah.
responsibility. And that in itself is a sort of a controlling behavior, because it's trying to control their environment and go, "It's somebody else's thing," and they don't have to take responsibility, which was quite an interesting bit to help me put that together.
Yeah. Yeah. How it ties in with responsibility as well.
Mm,
That definitely relates to the whole, well, one of the concepts through John Powell's book, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am, is
mm,
really going like, at core is this kind of fear that if I reveal who I am, I will be handled badly or I will be rejected or whatever.
mhm,
But there's also this awareness in the book is a lot of us are walking around, we don't understand what is driving us. It's the iceberg, we see the tip, but there's these massive bit of ice that's being pushed by the undercurrents, and we are totally unaware of all of that. So he says the act of self-understanding only really can come as I communicate who I am to someone else.
mm,
And as you learn to do that and you grow in that self-understanding, that is the almost the door through which you can start to grow in maturity, because you start to see, oh, these are the patterns, these are my inhibitions, or these are my immaturities that I'm walking around with, the narrative that I have inherited and started to replay out in every relationship I find myself in. And so it's only through the process of I enter into a trust relationship and I go a little bit and you show yourself trustworthy, so I express a bit more, and through that I learn more about myself. But that, of course, is a long journey, and it is a hard journey, and it takes responsibility. It's the
mhm,
whole thing of you can't heal someone, you can't make someone mature in the same way that they'll say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So if
mm,
someone doesn't want to take responsibility, if someone doesn't want to ultimately learn how to get self-control, you can't make them. And so actually, in a sense, what it does is as you said, everybody else around them has to adjust themselves to show up in a way, and that is actually precisely what they want. They want people to respond so that other people change rather than themselves. It's so interesting because actually they get what they want, but
mhm,
what they truly want underneath, and maybe this is a bit projecting, but this is what John Powell's thesis is what people truly want is that personal encounter, that
mm,
communion. And by playing these games, we stop ourselves from ever getting that.
mhm.
And so we actually stop ourselves from getting what we truly want, and we settle for the superficial, the surface level, and the peaceful in the
Mm.
moment.
Yeah, and I've been in conversations with people or seen situations where they've responded so negatively, so emotionally heavily to a situation that didn't really require it, that
Mm.
everybody else around just goes, it's not worth it. Just let them have their way. We'll just sort of like tread around that existence because it's too hard and they're too stuck. And that's just quite an interesting situation to go, oh, like you said, do we even realize when that's happened? Do I realize when I've done that? Like, do I respond in a pouty way sometimes? Probably. A self-pitying way, definitely. And actually, it's like, oh no, what's the mature thing to do here? Maybe it isn't that. Maybe it's to own that and go, oh, that touched something. What's going on underneath? What was I worried about? What
Mm.
set me off? I mean, there was, yeah. I think it was a month ago or so, having a lunch with a few people, and something touched me. I still don't know what it was. It just got inside me, and I just said something really like unkind to this person that was sat next to me, and it wasn't like I was just like, and it was with an edge. Like it could have been funny, but I said it with an edge. So it did. It was like, oh, like, and I thought about that, and I thought about it like the rest of the day, and I was like, I still don't really know what it was in the moment that set me off, but I had to go and apologize because I'm sorry, that was not appropriate, like what I said. But it would have been easy to just be like, oh well, it was a
Mm.
joke. Um,
Yeah.
and actually I decided to take control. One of the things in my master's or my undergraduate, I can't remember, but it was the psychology element. One of the things that does kind of relate to this is sort of this idea of internal and external locus of control. I don't know
Yes.
if you've come across that. And it's that internal locus control is to believe that I can impact things. I can take responsibility, I'm in control. Whereas an external locus of control is this idea of like, oh, things outside me affected me. So you in a sporting situation, it's like internal locus control was, hey, we won today because we trained really hard, we played good technically, and we worked hard to accomplish that. An external locus of control was we won today because the wind was blowing really strong and they didn't cope very well with that, and the sun was in their eyes for 3 of the goals. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
basically we won because we were lucky. Or the inverse is true. We lost because we're rubbish at football, or we lost because the conditions were bad. The grass was
Yeah.
too long. One of my teammates tied his own shoelaces together. I don't know. It's like just something unlucky happens, and this is idea of like, um, and again, it's a little bit of a scale because we want to be able to appropriately own the right things that have happened. Like, hey, yeah, I did work hard, really hard today,
Mm.
and that meant that I did the things I could control. But actually, sometimes you can still lose because of things outside of your control.
Yeah.
Um, and so but if you focus on the things out of your control, you'll never own the things that are in your control. So it's just this idea, like, and I think that's the hard bit is what is under my control.
Yeah.
How do I self-manage? That's really hard. And ultimately, self-management is about emotion management. It's about impulse control. It's about those sorts of emotional regulational things that help you show up in those situations that can be more difficult, but also really positive. And sometimes, like you said, that's quite hard work. Impulse control, that is not straightforward. That's not easy, especially at the beginning when we're trying to do it. But so, and then maybe that's partly why sometimes we just get to the point where it's like, oh, I've learned these tricks that, mean that I can control people around me a little bit easier. And that just makes my life easier rather than trying to be in control of myself.
Sure. There's a couple of elements I want to pick up on. Number one, I mean, thanks for telling that story. You've not told me that story before, so that's quite funny. Actually. First going out online, love that. In talking about kind of controlling the external, and the internal locus of control, external locus of control, a quote I came across which I really liked was, "The one who cannot put order inside tries to impose it outside."
Mm.
And I think that again goes back to that blaming thing. Well, how is that? How is that controlling? Well, actually, it's seeking to shirk responsibility, get it out from inside, and it's something outside. That's what the problem is.
Mm.
And same with, if if I show up really in this way that everybody else changes themselves, that suits me fine, because the order is imposed, but it's outside rather than in here. One of the things though is thinking from, if we're going, let's focus a bit more on the self-control aspect, and like I have a goal I'm aiming for, or I want to show up more controlled in this way. One of the things in James Clear's book he talks about is just the importance of environment. And so if I'm trying to watch what I eat, then I can try and grow my self-control by like being in an environment which is really challenging, or I can just be like, it's easier to avoid the temptation of the biscuits or the cookie jar and get them out. And so there is an element of controlling your environment actually can be really helpful and beneficial. We're not saying it's all about being this, pure person and like you just, no matter what, Steve Jobs famously, when he with Apple, they were like, everything's going to be plain, everything's going to be white, and no sort of noise, no visual noise, so that we can be really creative. So there is an element of, yeah, absolutely, control your environment as is fit. But when we try to extend that to I'm controlling people, then I think that's where we've overstepped the bounds. And I was re-listening to an Andy Crouch interview, and a phrase that he got, I think it was Leanne Payne he was quoting, was, if I don't first contemplate someone, I will seek to exploit them, or not even seek to, I will exploit them. So if I don't first contemplate, I will exploit. And he was saying this, not even just in any particular domain, but just going, when I show up and I'm in a conversation with you, David, if I don't first contemplate that you are a person, you have that dignity, you have that worth, you bear a divine image in you. If I don't recognize that and behold that for at least a moment, I will almost instinctively see you as a means to an end. And we do this all the time in family. We certainly do this in workplace, and it happens all over the space in the world in terms of just pornography and sex trafficking and everything. I don't see the person, I see the means to an end, which is a release. So it's something that I'm thinking, oh, that's so interesting. Like when I see the person, and that's what I want to do. I want to learn. You're a person. You're not a tool. You're not an object. You are a person. And I've said that quite a lot now. But that's my.
What was the other quote you said near the beginning of there about internal and external controlling or something?
The one who cannot put order inside tries to impose it outside.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Actually, and I suppose we'll wrap up with something. A little while ago, well, Charlotte and I realized we need to get a couple of new windows, and we invited someone round to look at the windows and give us a quote. So he came along, sitting on the sofa. He's got these big like windows that he's showing us that he's unzipped, and he's security this and efficiency that and titanium this and all this technical bamboozlement of stuff about windows that I never knew. Probably kind of the point. And it was like, okay, so roughly how much is this going to cost? I was like, no, I can't tell you that yet. And just going through this process, and he's there for like an hour before he's even told us the price. And it's like, right, well, like maybe you just got to go soon, because this is taking longer than I'd sort of planned for a quick quote. So eventually, he measures it out and it's like, well, you're going to need this and security this and shatter this and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, I don't know really what you're talking about. Just give me a rough number. I'm not buying anything now. So eventually he goes, it's going to cost this amount. It's like £5,500 for 2 windows. And I was like, okay, well, thanks for the quote. We're not going to say yes to that. And then he's like, oh, well, what if I told you I've got some good news? And goes down and knocks the price down. And it's like, well, yeah, we're still not going to do that. Can you put that quote in an email though? Like we might be able to come back to you. Oh no, I can't put it in an email. And so we're not going to do that then. And then he's phoning up his director, and the director's like, well, maybe we can give him a new price. And then it was this whole game, and it just felt very like manipulative. And eventually I'm just like, right, I'm saying no. So can you like leave and get out the house? And I was kind of watching him and paying attention to all these things. And every time I said no, he'd be like, "But if I could give you the Windows for free, would you say yes?" And it's like, "Yes, but I know you're just trying to make me say yes because I've said no." And it was just this moment where I realized this guy is trying to like manipulate me. He's trying to control me so that I buy something, and not for my benefit, but for his benefit, because
Yeah.
he's going to get paid if he's not thinking about what's best for me. And so it was a controlling situation. He would say he was trying to persuade me, but it felt manipulative. I could
Yeah.
feel my emotions being messed with. And ultimately, we've all had experiences like that, whether it's with a spouse, a friend, a family member, or something like that, where we have been, or someone has tried to control us or
Mhm.
manipulate us, and we don't like it. No one likes it. No one wants to be a puppet, right? It doesn't matter like the situation, you don't like it. So I
Mm.
think that's the thing, is like, remember the other side of it. What's it
Yeah.
like to be on the other side of me when we are
Mm.
consciously or subconsciously trying to control other people? Realize you don't like it when you're controlled. We don't like it, so stop doing it. And it's
Yeah.
not as straightforward to stop doing it as just saying don't do it, stop it, or bury you alive in a box. But I think it's important to remember that actually it isn't nice, it isn't kind, it isn't treating people with dignity and as a person, when we're trying to just meet our needs by exploiting them.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we just wrap up there.
I think so. Yeah, a bit of a rant onto Windows. Hopefully, we've given you a window into this topic. We'd love to hear from you guys. How have you experienced this dynamic of self-control, controlling others from either side of it, when you realize someone's trying to control you or you're trying to control others? And let us know what other topics you would like us to cover in the coming months. This
Yeah.
is the Make It Count podcast. Hope you have a cracking week.